Hi, and welcome to Sociology. Today we're going to look at the process of socialization. Socialization is really an entire process from birth to death where we are socialized or taught how to think, how to behave, right? So we've already talked about norms, we've already talked about social construction, we've talked about cultural scripts in our linguistic landscape. All of that stuff leads into this process of socialization. So how we come to know what we know, how we know, and why we know. Our theory for this is reflection theory. Culture is a projection of social constructs. So culture is a projection, right, of socially constructed systems, right, or socially constructed ideas. We connect this to the social script. Culture and socialization are intimately connected in that we have to teach culture, right? So last time we discussed how culture is transmitted through generations. So we can also see how culture is socialized. A term that we need to understand and know is hegemony, where a dominant group uses its power to elicit the voluntary consent of the masses. There is a strong emphasis on consent and quotations around it, in that we mean consent is not necessarily voluntary, because you have to understand what are the options ones are given, what are the consequences, not necessarily consent, but concession maybe, or just giving up. So here's a video, the importance of socialization. It will be underneath this video. You can click on it to watch this portion, and then it will be part of the discussion. So, the looking glass self, me, myself, and I. The self is the individual identity of a person as perceived by that same person. The I is one's own sense of agency, action, or point. Me is the self as perceived as an object by the I. The self is one imagines others to perceive. Other, someone or something outside of oneself, and a generalized other, internalized sense of the total experience of others in a variety of settings. So the self, as perceived by that same person, who I believe myself to be. I is what agency do I have, what control do I have, what ability to influence my position or movement within society. Me, how I imagine others to perceive me. So within a other or generalized other, how I imagine either the other or the generalized other to see or judge me as. Other can be identified as one or something outside, and generalized other is a total experience of others. So if you think about our class, other is one particular student, generalized other is our entire class of students. Here's another way to look at the looking glass self. How we imagine others, how we appear to others, and then how we imagine others to other people to judge the appearance or our construction that we think that we present. So how I imagine others to see me as a professor is articulate and educated and compassionate and kind. How I imagine others to see me as, depending on the context and the circumstance, either in a positive or negative light. And then if we think the evaluation is favorable, our self-concept is enhanced. Some days I just feel like I'm crushing it and that I'm doing really well as a teacher and that I'm helping students learn. If we think the evaluation is unfavorable, we can understand that our self-concept is diminished. Some days, just like everyone else, teaching is hard and I don't think that I'm doing the best job, but I'm doing my best. Still, I can potentially have my self-concept diminished. We're going to revisit agents of socialization. We've talked about this in the past. Some examples are families, schools, peers, media. All of these agents of socialization are where we are taught how to behave, right? Or we are socialized into our particular culture. A total institution is an institution in which one is totally immersed and that controls all the basic day-to-day life. No barriers exist between the usual spheres of daily life, and all activity occurs in the same plane under the same single authority. So we can see that prisons are total institutions, mental health facilities Inpatient or total institutions. One could even argue that educational settings are total institutions because they control your day-to-day life. They tell you when you can go to the restroom, they tell you when you can leave, they tell you what to be doing every minute of the day. So we can understand that when you are at an educational facility, you are in a total institution. We are going to revisit status, role strain, and role conflict. These are already terms that you should know from our social groups and organizations, but we are going to revisit them. Status is a recognizable social position, a teacher. Role are the duties and behaviors expected of that. Role strain is when incompatibility among roles corresponding to a single status. Let's say my chair is very traditional and wants me to lecture the entire time, but I believe that students should be able to do interactive activities and are able to learn best when they construct their own ideas. So then I would have an incompatibility against roles. Does that make sense? So then role conflict is a tension caused by competing demands between two or more pertaining to different status, two or more roles. A status set, all of the statuses one holds simultaneously. Ascribed, in which you are born into, involuntary, achieved, you earn or voluntary status. And the master status is a status within that set that stands out or overrides all. As a master status is contextual. When I'm in the classroom, I am a teacher. When I am at home, I am a caregiver. When I am with my mother, I am a daughter. Next, we're going to talk about gender roles in the act of socialization. We are socialized into gender from even before we're born, when we are being constructed within the human body. So I want you to pause and think about all the different ways that we are socialized into gender that haven't been identified within this lecture video. So gender roles refers to the ways that diverse aspects of human experiences are culturally linked to gender differences. So here it has sex differences, which is in your book, but we are going to talk about the difference between sex, sexuality, and gender. Gender is the performance of these gender roles, or the variation of. Sex refers to your sex organs, and sexuality is who you're attracted to or not, right? So when we think of traditional gender stereotypes, let's look at our linguistic landscape and look at the language that we use, which is symbolic interactionism, how we create meaning through our language or symbols, right? So within the feminine, it is dependent, submissive, passive, home-oriented, indecisive, talkative. Masculine, on the other hand, is aggressive, dominant, not easily hurt emotionally, tough, blunt, logical. So we can see that these traditional gender stereotypes reinforces the cultural scripts we have about gender. I want you to pause this video and think about how many times you have heard these particular gender stereotype language or adjectives, and then I want you to think about, have I heard it within the last month? How many times, or have I heard it within the last week? I also want you to think about these images that I'm going to present, right? So in the upper left-hand corner, there's a movie called The Ugly Truth, which is a rough movie to begin with. It promotes these gender roles, these very narrow ideas of gender. But we can see just from this image that women fall in love with their brains and men fall in love with their genitalia, right? So obviously that's not true. Obviously, male-identified bodies are very capable of creating an emotional and mental intimate relationship. Also, it reconstructs this dichotomy of two genders. If we look at the lower left-hand corner, we can see that this is a Lego advertisement. When Lego first came out, they made a specific statement that Legos are gender neutral, that everyone has an imagination and loves to build. Within the last few years, they have come out with a female-identified line which focuses on domestic responsibilities, right? So we see that the female-identified body is a waitress serving another person. We see that it is based around food or culinary skills. We also, the other toys that they have presented are fashion or homemaking skills. So we see that this also reinforces the stereotypical gender roles. In the upper left-hand corner, it's cut off a little bit, but let me read it to you. It's an advertisement for Mr. Clean, which is a cleaning product. And it says, "This Mother's Day, get back to the job that really matters." So we see within this that an adult identified body female and a young identified female are socializing into the act of cleaning. We can see how this reinforces these gender roles that female identified bodies' most important job is to parent and clean. Not every female identified body wants to have children, but this reinforces that women's primary role within society is to mother. Also, it's just kind of messed up, right? That even on Mother's Day, the primary role of the mother is to clean and parent, even though this day is to celebrate and to be grateful of all the work that mothers and caregivers do. Media and culture. So media really is a reflection and perpetuates the ideas of racism, sexism, ableism, and classism. You are going to watch either one of these two videos, and they are going to be within the discussion board. In our lower right-hand corner, we see all of these bodies of color and then this white identified body. And this is referring to or came out during the Ebola epidemic. We see that a lot of people of color are being afflicted by this illness, but as soon as a white body is affected, then our society starts to care, then we have privilege to it. We can see the same thing currently with the Zika virus epidemic. Many people are being affected by this, but until a privileged body is affected, then do we care? Then do reporters want to talk about this? In the lower left-hand corner, we can see a Charlie Brown comic or a Charlie Brown image. And this is from an earlier time of Charlie Brown, but hopefully most of us are familiar with this. If not, it was a cartoon, and now it recently came out as a animated film. We see that the little boy of color is on the left-hand side of the table all by himself, and then all or most of the white children are on the right-hand side together. It says racism, sometimes it's subtle. So we can see that even from childhood, we are reinforcing these ideas of racism, that the body of color is lesser than, is supposed to be isolated, and is intrinsically different. So then we have gender and inequality. We're going to do the same thing here, where you get to choose one of these videos to watch, and then you will report on it, or you will utilize the discussion board to talk about it. This is from the 60s, when feminists were against or protesting the Miss America pageant, which we still have today. And it identifies that Miss America is in relation to a cattle auction, in that female identified bodies are put on display and then are judged for their aesthetic preferences, their ability to perform to a certain dominant gaze, or relating them to animalistic bodies for consumption and dehumanizing these bodies, right? On the right-hand side, it says break the dull steak habit, which again is animalizing or dehumanizing or relating the female body to a animal in which we don't have agency, we don't have thoughts, we don't have executive functioning, we don't have a understanding of ourself as an individualized agency. Next is critical race theory, understanding the nature of race in America. White by Law is a book that reflects on how race has been constructed, partly by our government, and how our government has reinforced these flexible and ever-changing constructions of race, and how race as we know it today has not been stable or fixed. And we often attribute race with biological factors, but that has nothing really to do with race, as well as the agents of socialization have utilized these manipulations to what we understand as race to reinforce other ideas such as classism and ableism, as well as continuing to keep marginalized communities in spaces of oppression. You do not have to watch this video, but if you would like to, you're more than welcome to, and you can do an extra credit report on it. This wraps up our conversation on